little while ago it came out that for many years now, Ubisoft executives have been blocking attempts to put female protagonists in leading roles in their games, along with a whole bunch of significantly more important sexual harassment and workplace misconduct violations which aren't the topic of this video, but I won't leave it unsaid. Fuck Ubisoft. Evie Frye's role was reduced in Assassin's Creed Syndicate, Origins was changed to be about Bayek instead of Aya, and most recently Odyssey was changed from Cassandra being the protagonist to a choice between Cassandra or Alexios. Initially this last one might seem like a fair compromise, and it seems Ubisoft agrees, because they're continuing that into the next game, albeit a bit differently. Nobody feels left out, you get your progressive Bernie points, everyone's happy, right? Not me. I'm not happy. There's many reasons for this, and I want to get into it, but first I want to reinforce that Ubisoft fucking sucks. I'm not going to shy away from saying that frequently. I like the Assassin's Creed series. I like other Ubisoft games as well. I know you're supposed to separate the art from the artist, but quite frankly, I've never been good at that, and it honestly hurts to know that the people behind some of my favourite games are monsters. I know that games are made by hundreds of people, and it's not quite fair to group everyone in with those monsters, but I would feel really icky if I didn't address this stuff in some way before talking about their games for so long, even if I am doing it to criticise them. The reason I want to explore this specific controversy more than the others isn't because I think it's the most important, it very obviously isn't. It's just because I think it's interesting. It's probably the most perfect example of fake corporate progressivism that you could possibly imagine. And if Ubisoft really does want to make amends, which just so we're clear, I very highly doubt, then this is a bridge they're going to have to cross eventually. Let me explain why. There's reasons both within and without the medium for why the option to choose your gender in these games is a problem, and we're going to go through them in that order because I want to. However, I actually want to start by eliminating the most common problem people have with this because I like a challenge. And that is that giving a choice of protagonist breaks the canon. In the case of Odyssey, as revealed by the novelization and the devs themselves, Cassandra is the canon protagonist of Assassin's Creed Odyssey. But when it comes to this video, I don't actually care. The most common, or at least the most socially acceptable criticism of this choice is that it breaks the rules, by the rules established in the series, and by the rules of basic logic. There has to be only one option, as you're living through the memories of a real person. The reason I don't care about this is I think it's a big distraction from the larger problems presented by giving a choice. The Animus is already a magic piece of technology with basically infinite capabilities, and any hand-wave excuse they can make up for presenting this choice is absolutely adequate for me, and getting bogged down in a lore debate just isn't what I want. Odyssey offers multiple choices and even different endings, which could pose a similar problem, but then so does every game in the series. Maybe not to the same extent, but choices like, do you use a sword or an axe? Do you wear hot pink or bright yellow? Do you spend extra time to kill all these guards with stealth? Or do you charge in guns blazing? By the rules established in the games, these smaller choices also don't make sense because there has to be a true answer for all of them. But a video game has to happen, so we make allowances for them. The problems with the gender choice are much more complicated than lore.
I will tell you all you need to know.
If you hadn't noticed, Assassin's Creed Odyssey really super for reals wants to be an RPG. It's got important choices, dialogue options, skill trees, gear bonuses, and armor sets. It super duper wants to be an RPG. And what's more RPG than a fully customizable protagonist, gender and all? Assassin's Creed doesn't want to be any old RPG though. It really, really wants to be The Witcher 3. I'm hardly the first person to point this out, and I won't be the last. Beyond all of the eerily similar game design principles, there's a key element that Ubisoft were trying to capture: the RPG with a fully realised protagonist. There's two major types of video game protagonist. There's the player character, a character completely created and controlled by the player, just like a tabletop game, only with a few more limitations. The Dragonborn in Skyrim, or the Grey Warden in Dragon Age. You pick everything from this character's race to their skills to what they say in every conversation. Then there's the pre-written, fully developed characters. Characters who you control, but who are independent of the player and have their own motivations and goals. Think Lara Croft, or Ezio Auditore, or any protagonist that isn't created by the player, really. There is of course the option to blend these two together, and you get a character both created and controlled by the player with their own agency and personality. The most famous example of this is probably Commander Shepard from Mass Effect. You choose many different aspects of Shepard, their class, their backstory, yes, even their gender, but Commander Shepard is still a character. They'll do plenty of things without player input and have relationships with other characters regardless of your decision. Another example, weirdly enough, would be the boss from Saints Row, a character fully customised by the player, but who is functionally their own character who acts entirely without input from the player. Of course, the most important example in our case is the big man himself, Geralt of Rivia, who holds the fairly unique place as a fully realised, non-customisable character in an RPG with dialogue options and important decisions. Unlike Mass Effect, where Commander Shepard can fluctuate between two extremes of personality, every choice presented in The Witcher is shown through the Geralt lens. An option is only presented if it's something that Geralt would consider doing. That is the primary thing that Assassin's Creed Odyssey wants to emulate. It wants to have a character that you control and guide through the story that's still their own person, and it wants to give you choices and options that character would consider, but it also wants to give players a choice in the gender of that character. That seems like a bit of a contradiction, but I have to admit they were kind of successful in that regard. Assassin's Creed Odyssey is definitely closer to The Witcher than to Mass Effect. Some might disagree, but Cassandra or Alexios feel like a person, and their choices in the game feel reasonable for that character to pick. The commitment to this idea is further, committed by the fact that you can't pick anything other than the character's gender. Their hair, their voice, their face, their scars are all predetermined, which means that the game doesn't just give you a choice of gender, it gives you a choice between two distinct characters. This could work. And if I'm honest, I think if they're insistent on keeping this as an option, this is a much better approach than the way it reportedly works in Assassin's Creed Valhalla. But let's be really blunt right now. Ubisoft isn't good enough to pull this off. Cassandra and Alexios are different characters. I know that might seem obvious, but really think about what that means for a second. They deliver the same lines and make the same decisions. They're very similar characters, but there's a world of difference to be found in the minutiae. Just because they deliver the same lines doesn't mean the delivery of those lines is the same, to the point that it can sometimes change the meaning of the lines themselves.
Do I look like a fucking fisherman? I sail a ship, not a boat.
It was just a question. I'm here to help.
It was just a question. I'm here to help. I wouldn't fucking be here if I knew, would I?
Okay, let me rephrase. Where was the crew meant to be?
Okay, let me rephrase. Where was the crew meant to be?
Are you ready to crush the Athenians?
I'm ready for war.
I'm ready for war.
Where Cassandra will deliver a line with sass or sarcasm, Alexios might deliver the same line with anger, and I really don't think this was intentional. I think this was entirely because the voice actors had different interpretations of the lines and the characters they were voicing, which could be fine again, but Ubisoft don't account for that in any way, and it's almost an unavoidable problem when you cast two people in the same role. Also, Cassandra's voice actor is just better.
You must face the ghost of your past, Butter. And that is a fate worse than death.
You must face the ghosts of your past, Butter. And that is a fate worse than death.
Smaller differences should build up to bigger differences. Eventually these two characters would disagree on something, but Ubisoft's writing, and maybe more importantly budget, can't allow that. But so what, you might say. Mass Effect especially shares this problem, but I'm not complaining about that, and you're right, if this was the only issue I could let it pass, but a much bigger issue in the context of the game is how these two characters would be treated very differently. Ancient Greece may have been more liberal than other nations of the time, but a woman mercenary like Cassandra would still have been a rarity. People would and should treat her differently than Alexios, whether it's patronisingly or curiously or aspirationally. Things should be different, but it can't be, because imagine how much harder and how much more work it would be to try and factor that in. Typical RPGs don't have this problem, at least not to the same extent, because their worlds are designed in such a way that it wouldn't be a problem. In a sci-fi setting like Mass Effect, you can assume that most people are used to gender equality and don't see it as a big deal. And while fantasy settings are usually loosely based on medieval history, sexism is usually absent from the fantasy world to avoid this very issue. And I swear, I'm not about to get mad at the Assassin's Creed series for historical inaccuracies. That would be ludicrous. I'm mad because it makes the story less interesting. Other RPGs do still factor in gender differences in specific ways. The most obvious example is romance options. Not everyone's going to be into you if you're playing as a lady. That's normal. Malshep can't get into Garrus' spiky trousers no matter how much he may want to, but in ancient Greek tradition, that's not a problem in Odyssey. Every romance option is open to either Cassandra or Alexios. Apart from that one time it forces you into a hetero relationship even if you're not feeling it. The other way gender can affect the game is flavorful dialogue changes, like this example from early in Mass Effect 1.
Alliance military. I could have been a Marine, you know. Instead, I joined the goddamn Citadel security. Biggest mistake of my life.
Harkin, right? I was told you could help me find someone. A Turian C-Sec officer named Garrus.
Hey there, sweetheart. You looking for some fun? 'Cause I gotta say, that soldier get-up looks real good on that body of yours. Why don't you sit your sweet little ass down beside old Harkin? Have a drink. We'll see where this goes.
I'll pass.
Suit yourself, princess. You know, if more Marines looked like you, I might have joined the Alliance instead of C-Sec.
Call me princess again and you'll be picking your teeth up off the floor. Now tell me where Garrus is.
Even these kinds of small changes to dialogue aren't present in Odyssey, or if there are, they're so minor as to not be noticeable. I can guarantee you that they won't be present in Valhalla at all, given the fact that you can change gender whenever you want. And that would just be way too jarring. And this is what I mean when I say that Ubisoft isn't good enough to pull this off. They can't even do the genre standard small dialogue differences, and yet they assign themselves the much more difficult task of writing a story for two different genders in ancient Greece. I think even CD Projekt Red would struggle with that one, and that's probably why they didn't even try. Let's look at an example from each side that doesn't make any sense, but can't be accounted for because it would be way too complicated to factor in. 1. Women couldn't compete in the Olympics. There are many things a woman wouldn't have been allowed to do in ancient Greece, naturally, but the Olympics are a big part of the game and it's never once mentioned as an issue. Nobody has a problem with it. Again, it's not my intention to call out Assassin's Creed on historical inaccuracies.
What the hell was that?
But in this case, and all the cases really, it could have been made a part of the story. Having to do something to prove yourself, or getting an exception, or even just finding some kind of loophole that allows you to compete. But they can't do that because it would be extra things only for Cassandra. 2. Alexios can rule the Daughters of Artemis. The Daughters of Artemis are an all-female tribe of warrior women who, as you may have guessed, worship Artemis, goddess of the hunt, virginity, and the moon. Yes, she is the most badass Greek god. Don't you even try and deny it. We stan a virgin queen. Wait, no. As far as my limited research can determine, the Daughters of Artemis aren't, real? Or if they were, they certainly weren't as widespread as they are in the game. I think the problem here is obvious, though. They're the Daughters of Artemis, and big dude bro Alexios can be put in charge like it's no big deal. Which in the context of them picking a leader based on strength is, well, it's a wee bit yikes, isn't it? Only a man is strong enough to lead us. Yuck. This is an option that just shouldn't be available to Alexios at all. It's not like being the leader of the Daughters changes much anyway, and you could also have a cult of big dude bros for Alexios to lead. There's only 3 solutions to this issue. Option 1 is write the game with these problems in mind and have different quests depending on who you play as. This is obviously the hardest and most expensive option, probably also the best option in terms of art, however. Number 2 is avoid at all costs writing in anything that could cause these problems coming up, which might sound easy at first, like just don't include the option to lead a cult of all-female warriors, but then you realise you'd also have to cut the Olympics and several other things until you're left with a really bland story, which is why this is the worst solution. Number 3 is cut the choice of protagonist. Write the game around one of these characters and factor in these issues when they come up. This is the easiest, most elegant, and most fitting solution for the franchise. And make it Cassandra. Obviously. We know now for sure that was the original intention for the game, and the reasons for the change are very telling and also fairly disgusting. Women don't sell. which is where we can neatly transition into talking about the real-world problems with this choice. The women don't sell idea is obvious bollocks. I hope that's clear to anyone watching Wonder Woman, Captain Marvel, or if you want to limit to video games, Tomb Raider, Horizon Zero Dawn, or The Last of Us Part 2. It's nonsense, don't believe a word of it. Wonder Woman especially would be a great way to sell this game since Cassandra is also a superpowered ancient Greek warrior woman. It's basically half of your marketing done for you. There's a much bigger trend this plays into, a common trend in all of Ubisoft's work. More than any other game company right now, Ubisoft absolutely refuses to let their games say anything. They will not take a stance on any issue, even if it looks like they do. Far Cry 5 is the go-to example here. What was that game about? Fuck all, but it sure does look like it's saying something, doesn't it? Is it about Trump? Is it about white nationalism? Is it about religious extremism? Stop asking difficult questions and just enjoy shooting these brainwashed cultists, you idiot! You fool! How dare you try and analyse a piece of media? Assassin's Creed isn't hit as badly by this, but it's still definitely affected. As I said at the start, Ubisoft execs, while sexually harassing their employees, point blank refused to allow an individual female protagonist. For one, women don't sell, apparently, but also because making a woman protagonist is actually saying something, it's sending a message. And if you bring elements of that into your game, even more so. Let's go back a generation. Apparently the original plan was for Bayek to die early on and for Aya to take over as the game's protagonist. When I first heard this, I thought that was weird, but the more I thought about it, that's actually an amazing idea. A long time ago, I made a terrible video reviewing Assassin's Creed Origins. Please don't go watch it, it's garbage. Anyway, in that video, I mentioned that Aya feels really weirdly stuck onto Origins because her missions are so disconnected from the main story. But looking at it now with hindsight, it's obvious that these missions are actually holdovers from the original game. Aya as protagonist makes way more sense. For some reason, a bunch of clickbait articles decided to point this out recently, but Aya was first mentioned all the way back in Assassin's Creed 2 as a famous assassin. Bayek, not so much. But can you imagine if a woman was the protagonist? If a woman was primarily responsible for forming the assassins? What would people think? That a woman can do things? Oh, we can't have that. Okay, I'm being a bit hyperbolic. It's not so much what's being said by the game, but more what's being said by having a female protagonist in general. Women protagonists are somehow still considered making games political by many people, and for some reason Ubisoft wants to avoid pissing off that crowd at any cost. Maybe it's because their executives are a part of that crowd, I don't know. I've run out of places to put them. Capital G gamers have a somewhat justified reputation as capital G garbage. In my experience, the stereotype is real, but it isn't quite as bad as it's made out to be. Some of these idiots will point blank refuse to play a game that's too political. But let's face it, since you put that little message in front of your games, those idiots aren't buying the game anyway. Most of the people who publicly complain about this stuff will still go and buy the games anyway, and then find some completely arbitrary justification as to why it's okay to do that, even though their weirdo friends think it's SJW propaganda. Besides, Ubisoft loves to pretend they're not appealing to that crowd. They love their little rainbow Twitter logos, and they legitimately tried to sell the gender choice as a progressive stance, which we know now for sure was bullshit. We know that the majority of players will pick the gender that matches them. In this case, as revealed by the numbers, that roughly 2/3 of players picked Alexios, which means that by giving players an option, you're giving them the option to opt out of the progressive path. So if you actually want to take a stance, then just don't give them the fucking option. Not that having a female protagonist is some groundbreaking revolutionary stance anyway, we're well past that. But it's still rarer than it should be. I feel so bad for the creative team who've been trying to push the franchise in this direction for years. I believe every word they've said about the issue, and I hope now that all of this stuff has come to light, they're able to further push it in that direction, although I have my doubts. Capital G gamers may be capital G garbage, but they're gonna stay that way unless they get some alternative viewpoints, and a popular long-running franchise like Assassin's Creed is the best way you could do that. Most people can handle playing as a different gender. Half the population never get a choice, because even now I still have to frame this conversation as if male protagonists are the default, because they still are. And we've got a long way to go till it isn't. I mean, forget all of the writing issues caused by giving the choice in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. If you just patched out Alexios and made no other changes, the game would be way more progressive and also way better. If you just did that with no other changes. I also realise there's some ladies who might disagree with me right now. Games are escapism, and entering a world where you don't have to deal with sexism and being barred from sporting events is very much escapism. I disagree because fantasy is a much better place for that kind of escapism. Assassin's Creed is one of the only AAA franchises that uses history as its setting, and as such it's the perfect franchise to explore themes of oppression. And I can even prove it. Back in the pre-Gamergate world of 2012, when Ubisoft wasn't scared to make their games political, Assassin's Creed 3 had you playing as a half-Native American, and the game explored many different issues that arose from that. More importantly, it gave the game a much-needed different perspective on the American Revolution. So yes, games are escapism, but Assassin's Creed has such enormous potential to be so much more than that. Potential it hasn't tapped for years now. I mentioned briefly earlier that I think the way they're doing it in Valhalla is even worse, so let me elaborate on that. Obviously, I haven't played it yet, but I can read the writing on the wall. Changing gender whenever you want is such a cop-out solution to this. Not only does it amplify all of these issues that writing for different genders causes, by making it literally impossible to account for them, it's also so painfully a marketing decision because they're still clinging on to that bullshit women don't sell garbage. They want their big flashy CGI cinematic to have a dude in it. And sure, they'll release it again with a woman in it 3 months later with absolutely no fanfare whatsoever. Did you even know this came out? I sure as shit didn't. And someone might argue that this is even more progressive, a AAA game with a gender-fluid protagonist. I'm sorry, but no. I can't take that reading away from you, but that very clearly isn't what's going on here. Male and female Eivor are different people. They have different faces and different voices. When you switch between them, you're basically switching between parallel universes where Eivor has always been that gender. But also, they've already said that the female version is the one in the novels and the comic books because there are some poor creatives working at Ubisoft who cannot get their ideas past the bullshit filter. Ubisoft is not being progressive by giving you this choice. Don't for 1 second let them trick you into thinking anything else. It was not provided in order to level the playing field. It was a compromise to outdated sexual predator executives, and we don't need it. Or them. It's not a very upbeat ending, is it? It's not a very upbeat subject. I just want to say, I fucking knew it. If you go back to when Odyssey first came out, and before you'd played it, I specifically said that it felt like Ubisoft had been pussyfooting around the idea of using female protagonists for years.